Hello Airfix fans and welcome back to Flight Deck. What a year it's been. 2024 was another year of surprise releases and great kits. In this month's episode of Flight Deck, I thought I'd take a look back at some of our highlights from the past year. The year kicked off the same way we'll kick off 2025 with an Airfix range launch. Some of the highlights included the brand new Shannon class lifeboat, the Chinook and a new Teal Bulldog. What's on your list for 2025? Comment down below and maybe we'll drop some hints.
Kicking off 2024 with our brand new 1/72nd scale Boeing Chinook HC1. Would you believe it? It's the first time Airfix have ever tooled up a 72nd scale Chinook of our own making. This model contains 171 parts, composite rotors moulded with droop, both EAPS and conical engine filters included, postable rear door and ramp, and a detailed cockpit including refined quilting effect for the fabric surfaces. The release includes two schemes. A depicts the most famous of all Chinooks, Bravo November, until being retired to the RAF Museum Midlands in 2022. It was the longest serving Chinook in the British service. Bravo November became known as the Survivor, as it was the only aircraft to escape the sinking of the Atlantic conveyor during the Falklands conflict. It went on to serve in every major theatre operations. B scheme served during Operation Granby in 1991. As part of the Support Helicopter Force, Chinooks were used to deliver special forces behind Iraqi lines and were later used to deliver food and aid to refugees. The second brand new tool release this year is this 1/72nd scale B-24H Liberator. Containing 278 parts, detailed interior and bomb bay load. This kit will include two schemes. Corky Burgundy bombers, 733rd Bomb Squadron, 8th Air Force, United States Army Air Force. B scheme, Valiant Lady of the 831st Bomb Squadron, 15th Air Force, United States Army Air Force. And the third new tool release this year is this 1/48 scale Bristol Bulldog Mark II, containing 120 parts and a subtly rendered fabric effect. Multi-part cockpit includes fuselage framework, ammo bins and machine gun breeches. The design is based on exclusive access to over 1,000 original Bristol drawings. Details include camera gun, wing-mounted generators, bomb rack and a landing flare. The Bristol Bulldog was one of the most important British fighters at the interwar period, when powerful biplane fighters unquestionably ruled the skies. Initially developed as a private venture by the Bristol Aeroplane Company, the Bulldog was the brainchild of accomplished aircraft designer Frank Barnwell. This release includes three schemes: J9576, number 3 Squadron, Royal Air Force, Uphaven, Wiltshire, 1929. K1088, number 17 Squadron, Royal Air Force, Uphaven, 1930. And Fighter Squadron number 1 Flying Training School, Royal Australian Air Force, Point Cook, Australia, 1930s.
We kicked off February with a designer interview for the 148 Ferry Gannet. Here's a clip from the video.
One of the first steps that we did was we actually visited Oxford very quickly because we needed to get a scan, and we used that as an opportunity to go look at the real aircraft. So we scanned at Coventry and then we looked at a existing aircraft at RAF Duxford. I don't have like a particular like an absolute favourite of what I designed, but things that I do like about it is that I've done the propellers. Both of them can rotate independently from each other. Obviously you have to do it manually. Adding all the surface detail like the rivets and stuff like that, I think that really like brought it up to another level. Seeing that happen in real time was quite satisfying. And then obviously the way stuff like the wings and the tailplanes, they all sort of join together. I think those are the sort of things that I was quite happy with. The thing that I'm most proud about is like the amount of time and effort that I put into it in terms of adding all the surface detail, because I added loads of recessed rivets over it because it has it in real life, and also some raised detail as well on the fuselage and other areas. Like the wings have a combination of both raised and recessed rivets, and I was happy the way they came out as well. I mean, the detail and everything came out pretty good, and also doing the wing fold, how it all sort of like clips together and joins together, I was quite happy with that because it took such a long time to design it, but I'm glad that I put that time and effort into it because it's paid off.
Cheers Paramjit, and by the way, if there's any videos I mentioned in this episode, they'll all be linked below if you want to watch them in full. March now, and Mike Wilde joined us in the Sprue Talk studio to talk to Matt and Dale about the brand new for 2024 Model World Live.
There's a huge amount of diorama building in model rails.
Yes.
Could you argue that it's model rail is more about diorama building than running a loco, isn't it?
I suppose it isn't.
Well, it depends what you want, I guess. But if you just
Again,
want to put some track down on a table, then away you go.
Yeah,
but
it's that really broad church again, isn't it? Where there's people who just want to run trains and they're not bothered about the scenery at all. But there's other absolutely stunning scenic layouts out there. I mean, there's some incredible scenic modelling that even beyond, again, my capabilities, way beyond that in terms of people's capabilities with scenic modelling.
Yeah.
And it's like building a giant diorama. It just happens to have a train that runs through it.
Yeah.
But it'll always have buildings in it. It'll always have vehicles in it. It's always going to have trees, bushes, landscape, all those kind of things.
a story.
Yeah, exactly. There's a story to it. And there's also some really interesting techniques coming through now as well. And where traditionally a lot of the railway stuff, for example, used to rely on scratch building for the best stuff for creating individual structures and things. There's now laser cutting start to come through for that, which has brought different types of structures as well. For example, our biggest model rail we've got there, which is the biggest one there's ever been for double O gauge, made by Pete Waterman, the former record producer. That's going to be 208 feet long, model the West Coast Main Line, but it's modelling 3 stations. It's got full-scale buildings. All it needs is about the Britain 5 past over the top of it.
Well, we can arrange that. Not the real thing, obviously, but
Miniature one, exactly.
I'll just throw a Lancaster over the top of it at some point. So is that... You said earlier it's going to be the longest... That layout is going to be the longest it's ever been at the show. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it's the biggest it's ever been. So the long story short with that, so Pete started doing an event in Chester Cathedral each summer called Making Tracks. It started off by building a 64-foot layout, then he built 2 more 64-foot layouts the next 2 years. We joined all those 3 together at the Great Electric Train Show last October, and now we're joining all 3 of those together with another 100-foot of new layout at Model World Live.
Fantastic.
So
That's
it'll be
an
amazing diorama, if you like.
Yeah.
March was International Women's Month and we celebrated it in a big way. There's a link in the description for an interview with Ellie Carter, Britain's youngest ever female pilot. Ellie has her sights set on rewriting history once again, this time by becoming the first woman to pilot a century-old biplane used in World War I, a replica Sopwith Strutter. She will be the first woman to ever fly the aircraft. The 1st of April marked the first surprise release of the year, and it probably wasn't the kit you were hoping for. We introduced the 1/3 scale paper plane you can 3D print at home. First seen in Japan in 1831, you may say that the humble paper plane was the beginning of all modelling. Fast forward to present day, and we now bring you a kit with an exceptional level of detail and craftsmanship. And if you missed this release, you can still download the STL file and print it at home. April also saw the launch of the D-Day documentary series. I really enjoyed this series, and hopefully next year there'll be more of these style videos to come. For the D-Day landings to succeed, practice was crucial, but it was just as important to keep it from the Germans, so they wouldn't find out the Allies' plans. The search went underway for beaches and conditions which were like the target landings. Slapton Sands was selected due to the beach resembling the code-named Utah Beach. Before American military could get their practice underway, they would require about 3,000 local residents to be evacuated from their homes. The quiet seaside town became a hive of activity, as 30,000 US troops moved in and brought their landing crafts, ships and tanks with them. The practice, named Exercise Tiger, was set to mimic the whole D-Day operation, starting with loading men, tanks and equipment onto landing craft and following it all the way to the landings on the beaches. This was essentially a full-scale D-Day rehearsal. On the 22nd of April 1944, the exercise kicked off, and between the 22nd and the 25th, troops loaded into carriers. On the 26th of April, those carriers embarked on their journeys. The route was to start from Plymouth and take the course down to Slapton Sands to simulate the crossing of the English Channel. The morning of the 28th, the exercise kicked off, with HO at the landing time set for 7:30 that morning. Before the landings, they decided to include live firing to mimic what the US troops might feel in Normandy. HMS Hawkins was set to shell the beach between 6:30 and 7:30, just before the troops would land on Slapton Sands. Challenges and delays with the landing ships that morning led Admiral Don P. Moon, the commanding officer, to decide to postpone the exercise by an hour. This change was effectively communicated to HMS Hawkins, and the new firing time was rescheduled to 7:30 to 8:30. However, and despite efforts, some of the landing craft still headed to the beaches at the original time of 7:30, where they were met with a storm of shells from HMS Hawkins. It's easy to imagine how these young and relatively inexperienced soldiers reacted to these shells raining upon them. But despite this, they pressed on, believing it was all still part of the exercise. At first, the firing wasn't a major problem, with the firing lines clearly marked out with white tape and the soldiers funneled in between them. During the exercise briefing, the soldiers were told to return fire to simulated enemy positions. Believing their guns were filled with blanks, they fired away. Little did they know, their guns were actually loaded with live ammunition. The troops had already clustered together to avoid the certain death zones either side of them, but this tight grouping led to many friendly fire incidents. The chaos that unfolded meant that a lot of soldiers strayed into HMS Hawkins' firing zone, where they were met with the Navy's heavy artillery. Despite the friendly fire incident, the operation went ahead as planned, with a second larger convoy of LSTs operating on the delayed timetable heading to the beachfront. The LSTs required protection. They were being escorted by both HMS Scimitar and HMS Azalea. However, due to a collision between HMS Scimitar and one of the LSTs, the former had to return to Plymouth for repairs, leaving the convoy with only the smaller HMS Azalea for protection. Incredibly, communication broke down once again, with HMS Azalea operating on a different radio frequency to the LSTs. Azalea received a warning of German E-boats that were spotted earlier that morning, whereas the LSTs remained completely unaware. HMS Azalea led the convoy of slow-moving LSTs, opting for a straight-line route instead of the safer zigzag pattern. This proved fatal when the German E-boat spotted the LSTs with just one ship for protection. The German E-boat crews could hardly believe their luck. Meanwhile, the troops aboard the LSTs were completely exposed. Suddenly, and without warning, the E-boats launched torpedoes at the LSTs. Some were sunk instantly, while others were set ablaze, with soldiers scrambling to get off, burdened by their D-Day preparation gear. In total, approximately 750 men died in the exercise, with a lot of them drowning. Tragically, some of these deaths could have been prevented if the men were properly shown how to put on their lifebelts, with some of them putting them on around their waist. As they jumped into the water, they were flipped and hurled upside down due to the weight of the gear in their backpacks. Even for those who donned their lifebelts on correctly, they'd have to withstand the icy cold water, leading to many deaths from hypothermia. The operation was quickly classified as top secret, not only to prevent the Germans from finding out about the practices, but also to prevent the troops from finding out about the devastation that was caused, which could severely dampen their morale. Also in April, we took a look at the Dinosaurs kit from 2005. This unboxing is extra special as this kit has been left untouched and unopened for over 15 years. This kit is a starter set in style and includes paint and glue. There's 3 different dinosaurs in this kit: a Stegosaurus, a Triceratops, and of course, a Tyrannosaurus Rex. First up, let's look at the Stegosaurus kit. The body is split into 2 and you can see the gaps in the mould where the legs will go. The Stegosaurus tooling dates back from 1978, with it appearing in several different boxes throughout its lifetime until most recently in this boxing in 2005. The instructions do include some facts about the Stegosaurus, but you'll have to forgive me if the 2005 dinosaur facts are a little outdated. The Stegosaurus measured about 7 metres and was a vegetarian. Certain researchers think that the plates on its back could play the role of cooling elements or radiators, making it possible for these animals to live in the very hot life of North America. Now onto the paints you get in this kit, and you may recognise this style of paint pot, which doesn't look too dissimilar to the modern day ones you get in starter sets. You also get the classic tube of poly cement, but not in the modern day yellow. Do you remember your poly cement looking like this? Let me know down below. And the last paint pot you get is these old looking Humbrol Super Acrylic paints. Next up, let's take a look at the Triceratops. Unlike the Stegosaurus, the body fits onto the frame along with all its limbs. The tooling for the Triceratops is slightly older, first coming into the range in 1977. On the second sprue we can get a closer look at the head and it looks really good. These kits are starting to give me the modelling itch. What do you think? Should we have a crack at building and painting the dinosaurs? Let me know down below. Now onto the dinosaur you've all been waiting for, the T-Rex. This tooling is also from 1977. You can see some really small parts on this sprue, pieces that look like teeth, and of course the iconic small T-Rex arms. The second sprue is where it starts to get exciting. We get to see the face of the T-Rex up close, and I have to say, it's pretty terrifying. Finally, onto the instructions. The kit looks pretty easy to assemble, as you could probably tell by the large parts on the sprues earlier. Well, that was the dinosaur kit from 2005. Did you build this kit? Should we bring back the dinosaurs? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, please like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. At the end of April, we announced our collaboration with watch brand AV8. May continued with another D-Day episode, this time looking at the preparation that went into the air invasion.
With deception and misinformation rife, the Allies took to the air to deliver even more distractions for the Germans. Building on the groundwork laid by Operation Fortitude South, they reinforced the idea of a fictitious invasion in Calais. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, as troops went to the real invasion point in Normandy, a squadron of boats and bombers set to divide the German troops. Knowing an invasion force as big as the one heading to Normandy would almost certainly be picked up by enemy radar, the Allies set out a plan to distract and delay German forces. One of the operations devised for this was called Operation Glimmer. Throughout the late night of June 5th and the early hours of June 6th, the 218 Squadron, utilising short Stirling bombers, dropped chaff between Dover and Calais.
Chaff is thin strips of metal. It was deployed to disrupt enemy radar, causing it to detect multiple large objects and creating the impression of a substantial amphibious fleet.
The dropping of chaff was complemented by small unmanned boats, towing behind them transponders. These transponders would usually be towed by bombers during their flight. As easy as it sounds, the operation was rather complex. The bombers would have to fly in a complicated circular pattern and drop the chaff at the perfect time to mimic the size, the speed, the shape of an invasion fleet.
Under the second operation, Operation Taxable, a larger fleet of Lancasters from the 617 Squadron replicated the same practice. This time simulating an attack towards the Port-au-Cap d'Entrefait near the major port town of Le Havre. Some of the first boots on the ground on D-Day were the paratroopers part of Operation Titanic, landing just after midnight on June 6th. Operation Titanic involved dropping dummy parachuters alongside real paratroopers. The dummies themselves were a lot smaller than life size, however the darkness of night would make them appear actual size. I wanted to know more about Operation Titanic and D-Day itself, so I headed down to the D-Day story in Portsmouth and was lucky enough to speak to their curator, Andrew Whitmarsh.
So this particular one wasn't used in Normandy because effectively they would have been destroyed in use, but it's of the type that was used in World War II. So they were used on D-Day either side of the landing beaches. There were airborne drops, and then so real airborne troops landing, and then a bit further afield on either side near the airborne drops, they dropped these dummy paratroopers. So there about 500 of them dropped in Normandy at different points. And the idea was that from a distance, when it's in the air, you can see the parachute here, it would have looked like a normal paratrooper. On a dark night, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Yeah.
There were other kind of clever details, like some of them were fitted with equipment that when they landed, it would set off firecrackers that would sound like a gunfight. There were also some members of the SAS, the Special Air Service, who landed with them in the same areas and then played recordings of sounds of battle. So it was basically to confuse the Germans as to exactly where the airborne landings were taking place, the parachute landings and glider landings.
And it's called a Rupert, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what they're known as. I think there is, as far as, there's different theories for the name.
Yeah.
I'm not sure anyone absolutely knows, but my favourite one really is that Rupert was also a name for a junior army officer, and I'd like to think that some sort of slightly unkind person drew a parallel between this inanimate dummy and a sort of fairly sort of useless because of his inexperienced army officer, and said, well, they're effectively the same thing.
That's good.
Which is a bit cruel, but that's my favourite theory about where the name came from.
Approximately 500 dummies were dropped in these locations. These locations complemented Operation Taxable and Operation Glimmer, adding to the illusion that an invasion was happening 80 kilometres away from Normandy.
Released in May was the new tool Liberator in 1/72nd scale. Also in May, the new tool quick build tanks were released in 1/35th scale, the Sherman Firefly and Tiger 1. At the end of May, we released the new tool Bristol Bulldog Mark II. In June, Airfix announced the Aviation Photo Awards for the third year in a row. week later, the new Teal Boeing Chinook HC-1 in 1/72nd scale hit your workbenches. June also marked the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and to commemorate it, we put together the 4-part documentary into a full 60-minute documentary with extended clips.
So Andrew, we're standing on LCT 7074. What can you tell me in particular about its history?
So LCTs like this one were really heavily used on D-Day, so there were over 800 used for carrying troops. And there were various different marks. This is one that was built in the UK, but there were also some built in the US, for example. But they had some differences, but they had lots of similar features, particularly like what we can see behind us here, the tank deck, the big space for carrying tanks or other vehicles. So the tank in LCT, landing craft tank, is slightly misleading because they didn't just carry tanks. That was part of the reason they were created was for tanks, but then they carried all sorts of other different vehicles and supplies as well.
And how many men could fit on you? How many tanks could hold what?
Well, it depended on the size of the tank or the other vehicles, so it's a bit hard to say exactly, which sounds like I'm trying to be clever, but we know that on LCT 7074, this particular landing craft, there were 10 tanks on D-Day, so mostly Stuart tanks, so fairly small. We've now got a Churchill Crocodile, for example, and just to take that example, because the Churchill is so wide, it's wider than a Sherman, for example, or a Stuart, so you couldn't get 2 Churchills abreast. So there's factors like that would sort of affect how many vehicles they could carry. But all of the crews of the tanks or the other vehicles that were on board would be on board during the crossing. Obviously, they didn't get to France and then the troops came on. So
that makes sense.
because they loaded up for D-Day several days in advance, and then D-Day was delayed by 24 hours, the troops would have actually been on here for quite a long time by the time they landed on D-Day. The troops on LCT 7074 in fact landed on the 7th of June, but they were off the beach on D-Day. And actually maybe the conditions today, it's not the nicest of days, it gives you a bit of a sense of what it might have been like being on board an LCT like this for several days. There aren't kind of nice warm heated cabins somewhere here for the troops to spend in, so they were on this space here on the tank deck. You really have to feel for them, because at least the crew of the LCT would have been used to being in these sorts of conditions at sea, but the troops would probably not.
And before D-Day was delayed, wasn't it? So would they had been stationed somewhere and then had to stay here for an extra day, waiting to go to where they were heading to?
Yeah, so they loaded up in the Harwich, Felixstowe area, and the reason that they were there rather than somewhere like Portsmouth, so somewhere closer to Normandy, was the troops on board were part of the follow-up forces. So the plan was that there were different convoys arriving off Normandy at different times. Obviously, you couldn't have them all arrive all at once, because that would have just been complete chaos. So this was part of a convoy that would arrive a bit later on D-Day, and the follow-up forces that were carried on this and similar landing craft were not the initial assault troops, but they would have come behind and keep the momentum of the advance going.
So what can you tell us about how this came into possession of the museum? What's the LCT 7074's history?
Yeah, so the LCT is actually now owned by the National Museum of the Royal Navy rather than us. So the project to display the landing craft here is a partnership between the National Museum of the Royal Navy and us. But going back in its history, at the end of World War II, this LCT was converted to be a sort of floating workshop for landing craft. So the deck was covered over, so there was an enclosed workshop space. and that would have gone out to the Far East for continued the continuation of the war out there. The Second World War came to an end, so it wasn't needed there. But that meant it had this, because it had this sort of covered over deck, it was suitable for conversion to its next role. So first it became a club ship. So this was for the Master Mariners of the Association of Liverpool. So they had, it was basically like a clubhouse, so they could go to have lunch or have formal dinners, that kind of thing. After a while they started sharing the space with a nightclub, and then over time the nightclub, the Master Mariners moved elsewhere. Not, I don't think, because they were driven out by the nightclub or anything like that, but it just they chose to move out, and then it was just operated as a nightclub. So it's a bit hard to imagine what it would have looked like then. As I said, this was all covered over, so there was enclosed spaces here, and then there was another set of rooms built up on top. But it was operating as a nightclub.
Might be a silly question, but we were thinking this the other day. Where would they put the DJ or the dance floor?
So there was a light-up dance floor just down here, so near the front of the Churchill tank, where it now is. The space, directly below us, the fuel tank was the bar. So where the bar staff would have been in what was originally the fuel tank, and then the people being served at the bar would have been in the engine room, which is just below us, just this side. There's wing tanks in the landing craft, so originally they were enclosed tanks, not this sort of tank, but a sealed space that you could pump water into or out of to help balance the landing craft. But when it was a nightclub, they actually used them as service corridors because they run down either side of the landing craft. So it was all quite cleverly adapted to make it all work. And the wheelhouse here, which is where the LCT was steered from, that was apparently the manager's office. So they adapted all the different spaces.
I wonder if they really knew what they were kind of dancing on top of, I suppose. It's kind of
Well,
quite fascinating.
that actually the history, when it was a nightclub, the history of the LCT was something that was quite prominently displayed. Really? So there was a sign on club ship landfall, as it was called in those days, that it was LCT 7074 taking part in D-Day. And actually the owners at that time, or certainly one of the two owners, we know from his family that he was keen to preserve the history of the LCT, and he'd have quite liked to restore it to this sort of condition. So, but it's because of that nightclub period, which people sometimes are slightly surprised by. Obviously, it's a bit different from its original use, but that period was really important because it meant that the LCT survived from the late 40s until today. If it hadn't been operating as a nightclub, it would have been scrapped like so many other of these LCTs were.
You can watch the full documentary in the description below. At the end of June, the Airfix team held a special event at the RNLI HQ for the launch of the Shannon-class lifeboat starter set. The engineering team at the RNLI HQ was presented with their own built and displayed model of the RNLI Shannon-class lifeboat starter set. In July, another surprise announcement, the Supermarine Spitfire Mark 8 in 1/24th scale. August now, and we kicked off the month with a new Sprue Talk, a modeller's roundtable.
So there's loads of celebrities, isn't there, that get into it and that seem to make it a more acceptable thing. But even saying that feels wrong because, of course, it's an acceptable hobby to get into. But
I think also because the quality of the kits has improved so much over what we remember. Certainly in our years, model kits were more toys.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at that first Blackburn Buccaneer you did. You actually, you could pull the wings out to fold them and things like that, which you wouldn't do on a model now. You'd either have it down, or you'd have the wings up. There wouldn't be a concession to that utility. It would have to be quite accurate. So I think model making has got more of a craft feel to it, a more, I don't know if it's respect necessarily, whether we're still viewed as geeks and nerds in sheds or whatever, but I think the products that come out are so much more detailed and look so much more intricate. There's an appreciation of the skill that must necessarily go into making something like that, rather than you've made it for your son or your granddaughter or whatever to play with.
Yeah.
I think there's a very different perception of model making.
That side of things was arguably what got me into it, into the hobby. I mean, I started out, I think it was a Concorde, the Sky King series, at 6. The one I definitely remember is the MRCA with the red, white and black scheme. Of course, that had the moving wings, although I needed a wee bit of help to unglue the wings after I accidentally glued them.
Yeah.
But it was, the Buccaneer was one of those early ones, and I mean, back then that was all we had really. But the playability for a 6-7-year-old was ideal. It was great fun.
They were designed as toys then, not the sort of professional models that we look at it as them now, really.
Some companies had them more towards the detail side. Monogram was the big player back then. But yeah, most Airfix and Matchbox and Revell, they were all the play type. It was great fun.
Yeah. Well, that's why they had the different colours, wasn't it? You didn't have to play. You didn't have to really paint them.
That was good fun.
But I did a meme. I think it was about 2 years ago, didn't I? And I had a pie chart, and I said scale modelling in the 1980s and scale modelling now. And scale modelling in the 1980s was basically build, paint, decal, and you were done. But now it's photo etch, it's weathering, and I think that's why the rise of, with raised panel lines and recessed panel lines, I think raised panel lines look good if you just painted it. But because we want to weather and do all sorts with panel lines, we now insist on recessed. I think that's a big thing I've seen. That's one of the changes. Do you kind of agree on that?
I mean, to a degree. I mean, part of it was the moulding technology back then, but it's not just recessed panel lines where you can get that sort of effect. I've seen quite a few articles where they've taken an old kit with raised panel lines, and it's you put a more modern kit with recessed panel lines against it, and you'd be hard to tell the difference.
Hard to tell the difference, yeah.
But it's just down to what you're prepared to go with.
But it's always a negative when you see, somebody say, oh, it's got raised panel lines. It's always looked as a negative. I've seen,
It's the
but
modeller's,
it's
the modeller's choice. It also depends on the aircraft or whatever the subject matter is. I know we had a lot about raised or recessed rivets with the Sea King. But then at 48 scale, when you actually stand back from it, you wouldn't know. But I don't think you could tell whether they were raised, and also you couldn't get the same number of rivets if they were raised because the way that the tooling is made. So you'd have less rivets, which just looks weird. Whereas if you have the recessed ones, they're all in. You put a wash or whatever in, and away you go. But I always say that, and it's majorly cliche. Please don't let that be me, but that's got to be you, isn't it?
I have. Honestly, this new iPhone.
First thing I did.
Other phones are available.
Yeah. No, because
we're not cutting that out.
They don't have that switch anymore, do they? You've got to actually. They don't have that clicker anymore. You've got to actually physically. Yeah.
Oh, it's a hard life.
It is.
It is. Yeah.
August was also RIAT, and we had lots of fun looking at aircraft and talking to pilots.
Hello Airfix fans and welcome to Flight Deck. I'm Nathan and I'll be your captain on this journey. We're at RIAT 2024. RIAT 2024 was a real blast, and thanks to everyone who visited our marquee. In this episode of Flight Deck, I'll share a few of my favourite aircraft from the static displays and chat with some pilots and aircrew. First up is the Turbo Firecat, which has a pretty cool name. Originally a Grumman S2 tracker used by the military for anti-submarine missions, it was modified in Canada by Conair. They fitted it with turboprop engines and water tanks in the weapons bays. The Turbo Firecat was first delivered to the French Sécurité Civile in 1982. After being retired in 2020, a private group called A3A restored it and returned it to service in October 2023. Next, we spoke to the aircrew of the E3A Sentry.
Sure, I can start. My name is Ruben Donkervoort, call sign Duck. I'm a pilot. Used to fly F-16s, but now I'm one of the lucky ones that gets to fly the AWACS for about 4.5 years now. Really enjoying it. This is Rob.
Yeah, Rob, call sign Bruce. I'm a technical director of this aircraft since 2011. I've been away for a couple of years to go to the air staff, but now back since 1.5 years and worked with the most beautiful squadron on NATO guided incursion, Squadron 2, with the lion in its crest. So happy to represent that one here at Fairford.
Ever since I was a small boy, believe it or not, I used to be small. I really wanted to fly airplanes. Faster the better. So I was lucky to have a career in fighters. But I'm really enjoying the latter part of my career in the big airplane here.
Yeah, for me, my background is air defense, airborne battle management, and command and control. I have a background on the ground-based air defense system. Started flying in 2011. The beautiful part of it with a unit like this is that it's a multinational unit. So we have 19 nations representing on NATO air-based guard incursion who fly together. On every single sortie, in average, we have at least 9 different nationalities on board. That's pretty awesome. And having the responsibility to run a crew like that, also on a deployment like this or any operational deployment, that is wonderful.
Flying, it's planning for that flight the day prior, the latter part, or the bigger part of that day. And on the day of flying, depending on how long we fly, usually it's up to 8 or 9 hours, with some air refueling in between to fly the missions we are tasked for by higher command. Show up way on time to do the last minute briefings, to check everything, the weather, the flight plans, everything else. And then we go to the jet. Takes about an hour to start it up, and then we'll fly to the area. We fly to the area where the guys in the back can do their mission. We make sure we stay there, and then we bring them back safely. That's the plan every time.
Yeah, so basically what we do, he as an aircraft commander, me as a mission commander, we coordinate very well in front. So like a couple of days before flight, we start to look at what the mission profile is that we're tasked to fly. How many people do we need? What instruction do we need to do? What kind of facilities do we need? So we translate that into a coordination on what we can and cannot do. After that, we start to build a brief for the rest of the crew. So the day before flying, I start briefing the crew and cutting it out in small pieces, small tasks for every section. And then we build that into a complete plan just before we fly. So people often have the idea that we show up in the morning, grab a jet and go fly a bit. That's definitely not the case. It's like 2 or 3 days in advance we start planning, and on the execution day everything should be solid in that case.
It's based on a Boeing 707. If you can count a little, then the ones you take on holiday at 777 or 787 even. This one is an old jet. Not a lot of electronics, not a lot of new airframe stuff on the airplane. It's still old-fashioned flying, which makes it really appealing for us. I have to work to make this airplane do what I want it to. Other than that, the equipment inside is state-of-the-art. It's fun to fly. It makes me earn my money. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, as said, it's the basic model of the Boeing 707, as everybody is familiar with, but then with the additional mission equipment on board. So instead of luggage, there is the bay where we put all our equipment in. We of course have the radar, the passive system, the radios, the data links, and what have you. That is all pretty much updated continuously. So the aircraft may be a little bit older, but they're continuously modified in order to execute the sortie that we have to execute.
The Twin Otter is still in production and is popular for both land and water use. The British Antarctic Survey specialises in researching the polar regions and other frozen areas of the Earth, including the oceans and atmosphere. BAS operates several research bases and the Royal Research Ship, the Sir David Attenborough, along with a fleet of aircraft. Their fleet includes 1 de Havilland Canada -7 and 4 de Havilland Canada DHC 6300 Twin Otters. September saw another surprise release with the F-86F Sabre, which was paired with another collector's coin. The team was at IWM Duxford in September, and we spoke to the Hawker Typhoon restoration team.
This aircraft is registered as G Hurry, H-U-R-I. It's built in 1942 in Canada, and it's been flying in this country since the late 1980s, I think, when it was actually restored. It's currently wearing the markings of 302 Squadron, but the markings are different on each side, and I'll explain why later. As you can see, it hasn't got a rudder on it at the moment. Unfortunately, the aircraft went in for its annual servicing at the start of this year, and it was noted that some bearings on the rudder needed replacing. They took the fabric off to have a closer inspection and discovered that there was even more work that needed doing to the actual structure of the rudder. So unfortunately, it's not been able to fly this year, which is a real shame. But we're hoping to get the rudder back fairly soon and get it back in the air. For those of you who don't know much about the Hurricane, this particular design of aircraft is basically almost in fact 1930s traditional design, in the sense that it's a metal structure covered in wood to give it the right shape, and then covered in fabric. So if you can see this is actually fabric, so is this, and the whole of the rear fuselage, if you move around here, is actually covered in fabric. If you look under there, you can actually see the underlying structure, which is just metal tubes squared up at the ends, and they're all joined together with these joints here, little brackets and fixings. The reason for that being they didn't want to weld joins, so that any repairs they had to do would need welding equipment. Because the last thing you want to do is approach one of these machines, which is wooden fabric, with a blowtorch or some welding equipment. On this side of the aircraft, you can see the markings. WX is 302 Squadron. The individual code letter for this aircraft is D for Delta, and the serial number, you could actually read that, is P3935. This represents an aircraft from 302 Squadron that was scrambled from Duxford on the afternoon of September the 15th, 1940. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think they were scrambled. This particular machine was the last one airborne of the squadron. It was Red 3. The pilot flying this machine, named Kowalski, he claimed a victory over Dornier 17. He got shot up, but he managed to get back to Duxford and land safely. The markings on the other side are slightly different. They are WXE, and the serial number is different because that represents an aircraft that was flown by a Polish chap called Szlopek, was his surname. He didn't survive that sortie. He was shot down and killed that afternoon. Whereas Kowalski, flying on this side of the aircraft, he survived the Battle of Britain, he survived the war, he settled in this country after the war, and he lived to, I think he died in the mid-1980s, something like that. So it just goes to show how small the margins are in a particular sortie, in a particular battle, in a particular war. One chap died, one didn't. The Hurricane is, although it was designed at the same sort of time as the Spitfire, the Hurricane first flew November 35, Spitfire March 1936. The Hurricane is a traditional design, and it sits quite high off the ground. So, whereas the Spitfire sits lower down, you can actually climb onto the wing root of the Spitfire quite easily without a step. The Hurricane is a bit too far up, especially if it's wet. So what the Hawker engineers did was they came up with this really great footstep, which if you pull this little lever down here, the little footstep springs down and the little flap opens, which is proper 1930s British engineering. It's all under the bungee cord system inside the cockpit. So you can now climb up onto the wing root. Of course, you don't want to fly with that down, so and you close this flap, the footstep springs up automatically, which is amazing in the days before computers. So, again, this is a 1942 built aircraft, so it has metal skinned wings. The first few hundred Hurricanes off the production line in the 1930s, the first production batch, actually had fabric covered wings as well. In fact, there's one example hanging from the ceiling in the Science Museum in London that is actually from the first production batch. That has actually got fabric covered wings. But the control surfaces are fabric. As you move round, see the leading edge of the wing, we have red patches. These cover up the armour. This is a Hurricane 12, which is basically a Canadian-built Mark II B version. So it has 12 machine guns, 6 in either wing. Now we don't have any utility for carrying machine guns around these days. So in this particular machine, the gun bays, the guns have been removed and they've been replaced with something far more useful, which is a fuel tank. So we've got an extra 30 gallons of fuel in each of the gun bays. The Hurricane is quite good from a servicing point of view, in the sense if you need to transport the aircraft by road or by trailer, it's quite easy. So you simply, this is where the wing actually is a separate piece. The wing root section is actually part of the fuselage structure, so the undercarriage stays with the fuselage. You can take the wings off and transport the airplane quite easily. It's different to a Spitfire. The Spitfire, the undercarriage is hinged here, but the wing comes off at the wing root. So you have to trestle the fuselage, jack it up, take the wings and the undercarriage off. You've now got a fuselage which has got no wheels on it, which is quite difficult to move. The main fuel tanks are in the wing root section here. You have 33 gallons in each of the wing roots. And there's another fuel tank just ahead of the cockpit, which is called the reserve fuel tank, which will feed the aircraft engine by gravity if the engine-driven fuel pump fails. The undercarriage on a Hurricane is great. It's nice and wide, gives you a nice stability on the ground. It retracts inwards, which is good. But the brakes are very light. They're just pneumatic air brakes. They're not really designed for stopping. They're just designed for taxiing. Propeller blades on a Hurricane. This particular one's got a Packard Merlin in it. It's a Canadian-built aircraft. It's got an American-built Merlin engine, Packard Merlin, which is out about 1,350 horsepower, I think, something like that. And these propeller blades are actually metal, unlike the Spitfire blades, which are wooden. The engine itself is liquid cooled. So there's a big tank, it's called glycol, just ahead of the reserve fuel tank. Pipes come down through the cockpit to the big radiator there. The circular bit inside the radiator is the oil cooler, to keep the oil cool. But the Hurricane engine, the coolant runs quite hot. It's usually running at evening cruise just over 90 degrees centigrade, and the pipes go through the cockpit to the engine and back to the radiator, so it gets really, really hot in the cockpit, especially in summer when the engine's actually running. Not only that, it's very noisy as well. This side is exactly the same as the other side. Just underneath the cockpit there, you can see a little panel. That's actually an escape hatch. It's controlled by a little lever in the cockpit. If you have to bail out of this aircraft, you can jettison the canopy with the lever in the cockpit. The canopy will disappear, and in order to get out of the aircraft easily, you can just pull the lever back, and that little panel there just falls away. It's not a door that opens like on a Spitfire, it's a jettisonable panel. And again, to highlight the fact this is painted as a Polish 302 squadron aircraft, we have the Polish checkerboard symbol. You can see that the code letter is different this side, as I mentioned before, it's Echo rather than Delta. And the serial number is different, P2954. This is the aircraft that Jack Schlopik was actually shot down and killed in 15th September 1940.
October now, and another surprise release. The Avro Anson Mark I was announced. October again, and another release, the Gloucester Meteor F8 with new schemes. November was probably the busiest month for Airfix in terms of Seeker releases. The first was the vintage classic Super Freighter. Airfix announced two new kits on this same day. First with new parts, the Westland Seeking HC4. The second announcement of the day was the Westland Lysander in 1/48 scale. at the end of the month we announced the club kit for 2025. The Airfix team always like to serve up something appealing for our club members when it comes to kit selection, and this year is certainly no exception. Before we move on to the model itself, we've made a few subtle changes to the overall kit package for 2025, including a club badge which now includes the year in which it was issued, something members have been asking about for some time, and the remove before flight keyring now has a decidedly Messerschmitt ME410 feel to it. The last month of the year now, and I had a crack at an F-35 starter set. Over 12 days, I transformed a Lockheed Martin F-35B Lightning II starter set into a festive Christmas centrepiece. The project began with careful preparation. I cleaned and sanded the sprues to remove any flash and ensure the parts fit together smoothly. Dry fitting the pieces was a key early step to test alignment and avoid surprises during assembly. Once everything was ready, I moved on to constructing the main body, taking care to get a snug fit and avoid any gaps. Painting smaller details like the seat and pilot added a fun, creative touch. The decals came next, and though applying them required patience and a steady hand, they added realistic detail and character to the model. Midway through, I revealed my big idea to transform the F-35 into a wrapped Christmas present by painting it with bold red and silver stripes. This involved meticulous masking, starting with the cockpit to protect the painted details inside, and later expanding to the stripe design. Masking the model's complex curves was a challenge, but it was worth the effort. I began by spraying a silver base coat, which gave the model a shiny, gift-like appearance, and then layered on vibrant red paint to complete the look. Peeling off the masking tape was a nerve-wracking but satisfying step, revealing crisp, clean lines that perfectly captured the festive wrapping paper effect. To enhance the holiday theme, I turned my attention to the shadow stand. I painted it green to resemble the base of a Christmas tree and added patches of grass for texture. The final step involved assembling all the elements and adding a finishing touch, a small ribbon bow on top of the F-35, making it truly resemble a wrapped Christmas gift. This is the completed model with its bright red and silver stripes, festive decorations and Christmas tree themed base. Hope you enjoyed following along the F-35 Christmas build on social media. If you did build your own kit, let us know in the comments below and tag us on social media. We'd love to see them. What a year it's been, and that wasn't nearly everything we got up to. What was your highlight? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget our new range announcement is on the 14th of Jan at 4 o'clock. We'll see you there. Let me know what you want to see.